You know, every now and then, in any profession you're in, health and fitness, if you're in the oil and gas industry, you're a lawyer, doctor, teacher, what have you, and just in life in general, there's certain things that you know, but you take for granted and you don't put a lot of thought into them day in and day out. It's almost like they're so obvious you forget about their importance. And that was kind of the wake-up call I got watching this lecture that Dr. Robert Lustig gives at UCal in San Francisco. And this guy, I believe he's an endocrinologist, and he begins talking about obesity. And he starts bringing up a ton of numbers, which makes a big impact on me when it comes to research about health and fitness, and particularly obesity. And big numbers are there, the rate of obesity increasing. We've all kind of seen it, and we've all kind of become numb to it, because truth is, if you're into health and fitness, a lot of times you are surrounded by other people that are also into health and fitness. You tend to frequent places like gyms or running trails, or hell, even areas of town where health and fitness is more of a priority than others. And real quick, this is Quick Sessions Podcast. Obviously, if you've turned it on, I'm Garrett Terrio, coming to you from Timberline Fitness. And this lecture I just watched started off with the fact that there's 30% more obese people than undernourished people. So it grabs your attention right away. How could that be? That's such an issue. There's something like 366 diabetics in America, and it talks about the strain on the healthcare system. Hot topic, election year, all that kind of comes together. And the strain on the U.S. economy is something like $240 billion. And even for, the highest GDP nation, that's a ton of money, just from diabetics alone. But nothing seems to get done about it. I'm talking about on a lawmaking level, on a regulation level. And, they put warning labels on things. They, one of the big deals they try to do is they try to educate people. And I don't know, when's the last time just educating people about something has done its job, right? We try to educate against drug use. Doesn't seem to slow down drug use. Educate people on, gun safety, and there's still gun accidents. And, it's funny, in the lecture, he talks about, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, which, side note, by the way, that's not the definition of insanity. Albert Einstein said that's insanity. I'm pretty sure it was Albert Einstein. I can't remember, but it always drives me nuts. So many people throw that around, and, if you look in Webster's, that's not what it is. It's just what one guy said. And, I think it's a little dramatic, but it's such a popular phrase. I thought I'd clear that up. Maybe you didn't know that and you learned something. Anyway, nothing to do with this topic. But this guy, Dr. Robert, we'll call him, he goes into breaking down, the healthcare costs of people. And, he starts off with talking with obesity because that's kind of the broad target. But he goes into the truth being that of obese people makes up, let's say 30% of the United States. Well, the truth is only about 80% are going to be a strain on the economy. The other 20% will have no effect on it. They'll be fine. They'll be overweight, but they won't have any metabolic syndromes that are caused by obesity or other things. So he breaks down that obesity isn't the problem. Metabolic syndromes are the problem. So let's say 80% of the obese people have it. Well, now we're talking more like only 24% of the population is going to be a huge strain. Well, if 75% of medical costs go to metabolic syndromes, that means it's more than just the obese people. That means there's also a huge percent of unobese, non-obese people, however you say it, that will also experience metabolic syndromes. And I'm not just diabetes, I'm talking hypertension, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver, cancer, dementia. All these are metabolic syndrome, classified as such. So what is the real problem? It's not just obese people becoming diabetic and needing all these financial assets and resources. What is it if it's not just being overweight? So that question is presented, and then we take a little bit of a detour back onto the obesity epidemic, as they call it. Now, it's still good to focus on obesity when it comes to these metabolic syndromes because, like I said, 80% of that group will have it, whereas the non-obese, only 20-something% will have it. So there's clearly a connection. But how did these people get obese? How does anybody get obese compared to 30 years ago? And it goes for a couple things. obviously we're eating more nowadays. I think it's something like women are eating 300 something more calories a day than 30 years ago. Men are eating another extra 200, which kind of surprised me that women would be higher. But maybe they were just eating so much less back then compared to the men that it skewed a little bit. But it's more than that. I mean, the kids today are born heavier and fatter. And what we know about fat cells is, they want to be satiated. They want the energy. And so if you're already starting overweight, the challenge, the trouble has already started. And as a kid, you don't control that. Your parents control it. And as a parent myself, there's plenty of times where you just want them to be satisfied, right? Getting your kid to eat green beans can be a fight, but they'll eat, a brownie, cookie, whatever, or even something you don't think is that bad, like a piece of bread, and it's easy to cave and let them eat it. So that's one of the reasons, right? Kids are already born behind, and therefore the snowball effect begins, because not everybody has the discipline to monitor everything their kids eat or only present healthy choices or what have you. Second thing is exercise. And this is especially prevalent with lower income communities. What if it's not safe to go outside? They can't really run around and play. There's not much for them. And that is, on a side note, why lower income communities are at higher risks of obesity than more well-off communities. It's because, going outside can be dangerous, right? There could be a number of things happening. Not great neighborhood, maybe people passing through, maybe there's violence in the neighborhood, who knows? Maybe they live in massive high-rises or something like that, or apartments where there's not fields to go play, something like that. There's always things like that. So that's another reason, the calories in are so much greater than calories out, which can lead to higher levels of obesity. But this professor breaks it down on a biochemical level, which all the jabbering I just did is, more of reasons we think about actively, but there's stuff we don't think about actively. And that is how your body's processing food. So the way it works, we got two hormones to think about. We got leptin and we got insulin. You're probably familiar with both terms, definitely insulin. But in a nutshell, leptin is the hormone that tells your brain, I'm full and let's burn some energy off. And insulin is what tells your fat cells to store fat and then tells your brain to stop feeding those cells because they've got enough food in them. So when your brain's working correctly, your hormones working correctly, let's say you eat a cookie. Say a kid eats a cookie. What happens? Well, the kid goes bonkers, right? A healthy kid will have a sugar high, and that's why you don't give kids candy at night, right? Now, one of the issues become in these overweight children and adults is they don't get that reaction. Now, why is that? Well, we just talked about the brain knowing when you're full and not. Well, if the brain's full but it still has energy, it wants to burn it off. That's where the sugar high comes in. Now, if you never get that signal to the brain, your brain's still going to think you're hungry, and therefore you're going to eat more to satisfy, right? So, now just being obese is a little bit different, right? What if your body isn't actually working correctly as far as eating and being satiated, being satisfied with whatever meal you just consumed? So the question is, what is making these people, if it is the case, what is making them leptin resistant, right? What is blocking this leptin, this hormone that's supposed to tell you, okay, you're good, fat cells are good, rest of the energy is going to get burned off, make you active, make you ready to go. What is it? What is blocking that hormone and stopping it from working? Well, it's just what we talked about. It's insulin, right? So specifically too much insulin. Now, based on studies they've done, nowadays, not only we're eating more and all that, we're producing 2 to 3 times more insulin than 30 years ago. That's been studied, that's been figured out. And what that does, to go along with the higher sugar intake we've had in the last 30 years, from 22 grams a day to over 100, which, as you know, or if you don't know, sugar is a high on the glycemic index. It produces a ton of insulin. This goes in the face of the term a calorie is a calorie. A lot of people say calories in, calories out, that's how you lose weight, and that's true, but it's about 90% of the way true. If all your calories are coming from sugar, that is obviously not as good as if all your calories are coming from complex carbs and proteins, right? And your body needs some. It needs the sugar glucose for sure, but what it does not need, which is the basis of the whole lecture and of this podcast, is fructose. Fructose is the bad sugar, and it's the sugar, the processed sugar, the added sugar that has skyrocketed in the last 30 years and it's not the only reason, but it's the number one reason that obesity has risen not only in the US, but all over the world. So what happens is all this extra sugar is taken in, so your body's producing more and more insulin. And this increase in insulin is blocking the leptin hormone from signaling to the brain that it's full. That's why if you give a kid some orange juice, for example, he or she'll just throw it down and then ask for more orange juice. Well, if they drink that much water, they'd say, all right, that's enough. I'm full of water. Too much water. You know how it is when you drink too much water. Same deal with cookies. My kid will eat a whole cookie, no problem, but it'll take him, 10 minutes to eat 3 pieces of chicken, right? They eat it, they like it, and it blocks the receptors. And it's really as simple as that. And it's something that, that fact of, we all know sugar's bad. We kind of know why it's bad, and it's very obvious. But like I said in the beginning, it's one of those things you need to be reminded of sometimes, and reminded of the extreme consequences that having this in your diet can do. And while, of course, if you're careful about it, it's never going to make you obese or make you diabetic, you would hope, but it's something, especially with kids, and maybe I'm harping on the kids thing because I have a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old, 5 months now. And if you are just hitting them with sugar every day, it's only going to get worse and worse as far as their insulin blocking that leptin hormone from doing its job, because sugar is addicting. It's just as addicting as any other drug. And the more you take in, the higher your chance of obesity, which means the more downregulation of your dopamine, which means those fat cells, they want to eat, just like we talked about when a baby's born. When you have more fat cells, they want the energy, and they want all the energy they can handle. And if your brain doesn't shut it off, that's where overeating comes in, that's where obesity comes in, and that's where 80% of the metabolic syndromes come in. And with, modern technology and agriculture and all that, sugar is so widely available now, it's crazy. There's just so much of it to go around, and you don't even know it's in most of your food. It's in 80% of the American food supply. And it's not just America. Don't get me wrong. I'm just speaking of it because I live here. But like in the Middle East or those countries where there's alcohol is banned. Now, I'm not saying alcohol is good, but it's banned. So what they do instead, they drink Cokes like you wouldn't believe, which is just as bad as having the alcohol in your system. The only difference is alcohol is kind of self-regulating, right? If you pass out, that's it. I mean, you could drink 6 cans of Coke a day if you want. And what's even worse is sugar. There's something like 56 different names for added sugar. And this stuff is in all the processed foods. In fact, there's a lot of talk about diets, different types of diets and all that. And one of the main things they talk about with diets is eating whole foods. And here's the reason, right? If you're switching to more of a whole foods diet, that used to be what we ate the most of. And if you're looking at a chart of all the things we used to eat, everything's pretty consistent except one thing. 2 things, really. Meat is eaten less because everybody tells us high fat's bad. And too much fat, of course, is bad. We all know that. That's down about 10% in the American diet. But you know it's up from 11% to 26%? Processed foods, all of which have sugar, because food companies know sugar makes things taste better, therefore you're going to eat it and keep coming back. And it's one of those things that is hard to see changing because, number one, you'll never be able to do a 50-year study, right? No one's going to dedicate to the same life for 50 years. There's going to be no baseline. And food lobbyists, companies, wherever you have it, will always move the goalpost, right? They'll always change it and say, well, there's not enough research or what have you. And second thing is it's addictive. So unless you start, making it prohibited or what have you, no one's going to stop doing it, right? At least alcohol addiction, you have to be 21 to even come close to developing it, right? I mean, you could steal it, don't get me wrong, but for the majority of people, you have to be able to buy the quote-unquote drug in order to get addicted to it. Sugar's available from the time you can eat, from the time you're 1 year old. And you just don't look any further than the stock market to just see what happens in an economic downturn. Coke, Pepsi, McDonald's, they're all just fine. In fact, there's some stock advice. If you see a big downturn coming, just buy those food companies. They'll be fine. Sugar's cheap. It's so available. It makes people feel good. Once you have one, you drink more normally. It's addicting. It's ridiculous. It's sick. And I guess if I'm going to sum up this podcast, and like I said, this is Dr. Robert Lustig. Gives a great, look it up on YouTube. It's called Fructose 2.0. It's a long one, but it's very informative. And it's just a good reminder of how bad added sugar is and how if you don't watch it, the slippery slope it can create. And not even from an addictive aspect of it, but just a general health aspect of realizing it's kind of in everything. And processed foods, to me is the number one thing to limit. I mean, obviously Cokes, Sprite, whatever, soft drinks, but processed foods in general, because you don't even know how much sugar's in them sometimes. They have the grams of sugar in the nutrition box, the facts, but there's other stuff in the ingredients also that may not show up there. So moral of the story, read labels, be careful, easy on the juices, all those hidden sugars, because doctors recommend you get like a sixth of the sugar what the average person's getting, right? And that's average, and some people are more conscious of it than others. But I know for me, for example, I always just get the lower sugar orange juice. Hopefully it's doing better, and I water it down for my son so he doesn't get a ton. But things like that are absolutely crucial into keeping sugar in check, which is the number one cause of the increase in these metabolic syndromes and obesity. So even if you're not obese, like I said, you still can develop these metabolic syndromes. I had a neighbor when I was 9 years old, great shape, always playing in sports, not fat by any means. So much sugar, ended up becoming a type 1 diabetic, or maybe it was I can't remember exactly. I was 9, right? But it's maybe scary is not the word, but it's definitely a wake-up call. It's something to keep in the front of your mind, even though it's very easy to just disappear into the back of it, and something to really be careful of, and something that needs to change, but probably never will, right? As long as it's cheap and readily available and people like it, it's going to be here, but it's not good. And, do your best to not become a statistic in the metabolic syndrome disease realm. All right, guys, a little bit of a long one. Like I said, the YouTube video is Fructose 2.0, I believe. And that's Dr. Robert Lustig giving the speech at the University of California at San Francisco. A long watch, but a good one, very informative. Check it out. This was Quick Sessions. Subscribe, rate, and review if you got the time. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff. I'm Garrett Terrio. See you next time.